Thanks for joining us in this session on collaborative contract management, winning with employers, technology partners, and big insurance. I have the pleasure today of introducing Brent Couch. You know him as the insurance guy, but he's the president of HealthSure, which is one of the largest specialized insurance brokerage and consulting firms in Texas. Over the last 15 years, worked closely with many of rural clients and important groups such as the Texas Organization of Rural Community Hospitals, the Texas Hospital Association, and the Texas Medical Group administrators to develop new and improved ways to ensure success for our Texas healthcare providers. He's a frequent speaker in our program and serves on numerous leadership roles with various institutions. He's going to help facilitate our panel discussion today, and so I'll go ahead and turn it over to Brand and let him introduce our panelists today.
Well, I'm very excited about our topic. The name is a little bit misleading, but I assure you it is more than comprehensive. It's going to be exciting, it's going to be fun, and you're going to get to hear some stories that I think will resonate. I think you're going to hear things that are going to hit very close to home to all of you. We talk about comprehensive contract management as sort of the three-legged stool, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But let's introduce who our folks are on our panel today. I'm going to start with Linda Walker right here in the middle. Linda is the CEO of Val Verde Regional Medical Center in Del Rio, Texas. We've got Nathan Tudor on the far end here. Nathan is at El Campo, Texas, and runs Midcoast Health System. And then right to my left, we have Scott Prezan, who's our managed care and direct contracting specialist with our firm, new to our team, and excited to have Scott here. I would say this, Scott has an interesting background. He's worked for the big hospital systems, and he has worked for the big payers. I like to call that working for the dark side. And so Scott has provided a lot of insight to us along the way. And so I look forward to hearing his color commentary as we hear these stories unfold on what they have experienced and what we'll talk about again, comprehensive contract management. Hard to say, right? Say it 3 times fast, try that. We have tertiary hospitals, meaning contracting with the tertiary hospital when you have your own health plan. Then we have the regional employers. That's the second leg of the stool, reaching out to that local employer to try to incentivize, encourage them to drive more patients into your front door. And then thirdly, managed care contracting. That's the traditional managed care contracting that we all have to deal with day in and day out as a hospital. But we'll talk about how all 3 of these are interrelated. Okay. Let's get right to it. One of the things I want to say before we start with Nathan is the challenge, because everybody has to kind of get on board here. What's the common challenge? What are we dealing with? Why are we talking about direct contracting in the first place? Well, here's what we have learned. And I say we, I mean everybody on this panel, and especially hospitals we've had the fortune of talking to quite a bit over the last year. And here's one of the things that we know. This is not a CEO or CFO's full-time job. Whether it's managed care contracting, negotiating with local employers, negotiating with tertiary hospitals for your own health plan, it's just not your full-time job. Secondly, we know that there can be a lack of perspective. So the question we get a lot of times is, hey, we got this contract, or we've been approached by a regional employer. How do I know if this is a good deal or not? Do I want to be in this network? Do I not want to be in this network? Do I want to sign this? Do I not want to sign this? And then thirdly, if you have even thought about it, which I know a lot of you have, because we talk about this from time to time, it's one thing to think about it. It's a whole nother thing to actually execute it. And that's what this group on stage is all about. They're all about executing on these game plans. We've talked up here before. I've been up here with Jeff Turner telling his story about several years ago, a regional employer approached their hospital offering a deal, if you will, that frankly he was not excited about. So what we want to make sure is that every hospital out there, whether you're the CEO, CFO, whatever role you're in, we want to make sure that you're prepared and you're armed to make sure that when the opportunities knock, that you're ready for it. And at the end of the day, that you're proactive. So that's what I'd love to kind of segue into talking to Nathan and Linda, is they are being proactive at doing what I love to talk about, which is beating the big insurance companies at their own game, which is exactly what they've done. So Nathan, I want to start with you. Maybe you could just tell a little bit about the backstory on how you got to where you are in this direct contract arrangement.
Yeah, Brent. Thanks for having me up here today. We're a self-insured hospital And when we started looking at a lot of our claims data, we saw a lot of really small claims that obviously add up, but we really found a few large claims, six-figure claims and up, that we were seeing at one particular tertiary hospital in Houston for our employees that were using it. So we reached out to them directly and had a conversation about negotiating the price on these claims that we were going to have to pay. And they were amicable to having that discussion, and we worked out a deal. And then we started thinking like, hey, why can't we just directly contract with them for all of the tertiary needs that we can't meet locally? And so we started having that discussion with the folks at the tertiary system in Houston. And obviously, that's not our area of expertise. So we reached out to Brandon and his team, and that's kind of where the process got started.
And I guess I would say on the slide here, we are talking about the negotiations were welcome. Maybe you could just talk, because here's the thing that I want to make sure that we drive the point home. Nobody wants to be in an adversarial position, especially in today's environment. Tertiary hospitals and rural hospitals have to partner and work together. However, when you're trying to watch your bottom line and you're trying to manage your claims, there had to be a conversation at some point. What was the reaction you got when you first brought up the idea of even doing a direct contract?
Yeah, so it was actually really positive, and it was all based on a relationship, a long-standing relationship that I had with the CEO of the tertiary center there in Houston. And we talked about how it could be mutually beneficial for both our local hospital system and his tertiary system, and what types of advantages it offered to both of us. So it was a very friendly negotiation and back and forth, and we made a deal that worked for both of us.
Yeah. And we're going to get into more details on that deal in just a minute. But I want to go ahead and jump over here. Linda, thanks for being here. Excited to tell your story, or at least hear you tell your story when it comes to, again, it was not adversarial. In fact, it was quite the opposite, but it wasn't an overnight deal either, not even close to an overnight situation. Could you maybe tell us how you started down this path, how it got started?
Sure. So we have a very large employer in our community, and I can actually say today that it is the school district. We finally finished up on Friday. And the school district had approached the hospital previously about trying to do some direct partnership because of the cost of their premiums going up and the cost being passed on to their employees. They were having employees dropping coverage because they couldn't afford it any longer. And so because we had really gotten to know the school district, the superintendent, through COVID, because we'd become such great partners, surviving COVID, surviving the 100-year snowstorm, we were very comfortable with each other. And so he called me one day and said, "Can I come sit down with you and let's talk about some direct contracting with the hospital. Our premiums are going up exponentially. We're going to be losing coverage for some of our employees, and we just want to come sit down. We just want to have a conversation. Can we do this?" So we did, and they had been crunching their claims data. We were looking at our claims data. There's another competitor in our community that there were a significant number of their dollars going to. Their prices were much higher than ours. And so we just started having the conversation. And with having the new leadership at the hospital, myself, my CFO, we decided, okay, let's really delve into this. And so we really started going into it. And at the same time, we knew we do not have the bandwidth to do this. We are going to have some help. But at the same time we were having this conversation with the school district, we were actually moving away from our previous insurer. We were already in the process of moving over to HealthShore. And so we were in the middle of the road, and it was like, okay, do we do it now? Do we wait till we're on board? And then do we try to do it next year? It was like, nah, let's just go all in. So called Brant and said, this is what we think we want to do. We don't know how to do it. We do not have the resources. Do you have the resources? And yes, I have the resources.
And I said, call Scott.
And he said,
probably
he said,
is
call
what I said,
Scott.
I'm sure.
So we all got together, and the representative from the school district got together with Scott, and we started having these conversations. They've been ongoing for several months. A lot of give and take on behalf of the hospital, on behalf of the school district. And so this is a pilot project for us. Nathan actually has data to show that it's working for them. We will start in, I believe, October or November. And then we're going to we'll be reviewing every quarter to see how we're doing. We're going to do this for a year with our school district, but our goal is that once we do this and it proves out to be a win-win for both parties, then we can open it up to other large employers in our community. So that's how we got started. That's how our conversation started.
Yep.
They reached out to us, great partnerships through a couple of pretty difficult situations. And so it's going well so far.
I think the point that drives home for me is that you didn't wait, that you said, you know what? I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, does anyone here have not enough going on? Anybody bored back home? Not a lot happening. And so there's no doubt that your hospital's faced with a lot of the same challenges that everybody in this room's faced with, but you saw the opportunity and there was no time like the present. Scott, I'm going to come back to you in a minute, but I want you to be thinking about that no time like the present also had to do with the fact that school district's health plan, they were going to have to make some changes for this to even work. And I'm going to come back to you on that in just a second, but that was one of the interesting timing elements to all this. Nathan, I want to jump back over to you and kind of pick up where you just left off. And you saw that there could be a bigger partnership. So every hospital online watching or in the room, if you're in a partially self-funded health plan, which I predict over 65% or so of you are, that's what the data shows, you're already paying your own health claims, right? They're going somewhere, you're in a network, things are happening. Nathan, that was what gave you insight to the data. You knew the data made sense, but you had to actually figure out how to make this work beyond just, okay, how do I save some money? There was more to it than that. How would you describe the relationship?
Yeah, it was obviously, I think, a win-win for both us and the tertiary healthcare system. The first thing that we always look at, though, is our employees, and is it something that's good for them? And we felt like being able to have a consistent provider that we could link our employees to if they needed, some very specialized care, et cetera, kind of make it easy for them to have access to one place and one network, basically as part of our network. We thought that was a really, really good idea. And then obviously it was good for our cost. I mean, the cost reduction is substantial, and we're talking high six figures in what we were able to save. So that was exciting. And then I think there's some obvious wins for the tertiary system with the business that we were able to send with our employees, along with building relationships for other types of activities between the two systems.
Yeah. Activities could be referrals, transfers, partnerships, telemedicine, all the different things that a tertiary hospital already would like to see a rural hospital doing, right? Those are the
Right.
examples you're talking
Yes.
about. Right. And so, Scott, coming to you on this one, you've worked for the big payers. You've worked for the big hospital systems, Houston, Texas being the medical center being one of those. What would you add as from the big hospital system's perspective? Why would they have wanted to do a deal like this with El Campo?
Yeah, I think financially it's a bigger issue for the rural hospital than it is for the tertiary hospital, but it's all about the relationship. And so Nathan mentioned approaching the hospital. The tertiary care hospital is going to hospitals like Nathan's and asking for transfers and referrals. And so the relationship is already there. I think it was more on the tertiary side about collaborating and kind of the professional courtesy and keeping the relationship alive than it was about, I guess, more money.
Yeah, because it's not. So if it's not about the money, then the relationship's got to be the most important thing. And just kind of having you go on record, having been there, the tertiary hospitals, they really do care. They're interested in having that partnership. Is that
For sure.
been your experience?
Like Nathan mentioned, he had a relationship with the CEO of that particular suburban hospital. And so part of their marketing and their strategy is to go out to smaller providers.
Yeah.
So they're seeking those.
Yeah, yeah, perfect. Okay, so that kind of sets the stage a little bit. So, and we're going to do this sort of jump back and forth a little bit here. And just to kind of refresh everybody's memory, you know, on Nathan's end of the story, while we're talking about his health plan and him representing his own health plan, because that's what he has, with a tertiary hospital, it could have been, in this case, it was Houston, but it could have been Amarillo, could have been Abilene, could have been San Antonio. It really doesn't matter. It's going to be some mid-market or urban market. And you could even do it both directions, depending on where your employees live. Midcoast is a great example of that. Midcoast's footprint is way bigger than El Campo and it expands across Texas. So now they're in the mode of, okay, well, let's go do this in the Hill Country. Now let's go and do it here, you know, in this part of Texas. So I just want to kind of remind everybody to not ever think too narrowly. I think not everyone's going to have a system like Midcoast, but it doesn't matter. What it matters most is that you think outside the box and you be proactive about engaging in those relationships. And then the flip side, of course, Linda, is I'm talking to employers in my community. And so Nathan's going to be doing the same thing with employers, and Linda's going to be doing the same thing with the tertiaries. So they're both going to be trading hats and swapping sort of these stories. But I want you to be thinking about that's the two legs of the three-legged stool of this whole conversation that I want you to keep in mind as we talk through this. And again, please, at any point, raise your hand, ask questions. We want this to be engaging in dialogue as much as possible. So everybody's got to ask the question, Linda, what's in it for both parties? So let's talk a little bit about that. Tell me what you think was in it for both of you.
Well, and this was a collaboration and a discussion, and we all wanted to come away from the table feeling like, okay, we're all going to get something out of this deal. So we were able to lower our costs on some of our carve-outs that would make it more beneficial for school districts' employees to utilize our services, increase our volumes. We have a huge rural health care clinic, and so driving that business because of low out-of-pocket costs for the employees, no copays. So there's ways to do this where it does become beneficial to the employer, which is the school district, and to the provider, which is us. Our volumes are going to go up, and their costs are going to go down, and we're going to keep more dollars locally. And again, as you all know, Del Rio, we are what I call the outpost, because we are almost as far west before you head down to Alpine. And so it really came down to what can we do to benefit all of us, not only the hospital, keep it local, keep our dollars local, keep our staff local, and therefore improve care for our community, for our employees as well. So we really got into the weeds of it. But to one of Brant's points, by the time they came to us and talked with us, their enrollment was 4 months out. And they said, if we're going to do this, we need to do this quickly. And we didn't have a whole lot of time, but we got it done. Thank you very much. Spent a lot of time. Scott has spent a lot of time with my CFO, and it's been a win-win, and we're looking very forward to this.
Yeah. I think from just me being on the peripheral of watching this, I would think the school district is probably going to feel that sense of celebration just as much as you are. I mean, it really is a win-win for the both of you. And that timing issue, so Scott, I got kind of two questions for you, because you are dealing more directly with the school district's broker to walk them through how are they going to actually execute on this. Can you maybe just describe what was the initial reaction from who was representing them, which is in this case is their insurance broker for that health plan? Could you talk a little bit about what they were doing and how that looked?
Yeah, they had already made the decision that they were going to move away from one of the large national carriers to a more independent TPA. So they were still going through their decision process of, do we use a network? Can we do a direct contract with the hospital in the market? What will be the most beneficial for us? And honestly, if we wouldn't have struck a deal, they would have gone straight reference-based pricing, which probably wouldn't have been the best for the district's employees or the local hospital.
Yeah. I guess we haven't talked about that, but reference-based pricing can be viewed as a dirty word when it's used upon us.
Right.
When you have your own health plan and your own cost to manage, there's other ways to look at that. But I guess, Scott, what you're saying there is kind of back to what we said at the very beginning and what others have talked about from this exact, this stage at a Torch conference. I don't want to sit back on my laurels and let them come make the first offer, because they're doing it from the point of view of, I got to keep my costs down.
Right.
So it's not going to be in favor of the hospital.
No, and that was part of our discussion from the beginning, is that one of their goals is to reduce this is the district, one of their goals was to reduce some of their healthcare spend. But in doing that, it couldn't come all off of the back of the local hospital. Otherwise, we would have just been trading one for the other. And so they would have done worse while the district saved some money.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have kept the dollars local. So that was the discussion from the beginning, was one, that it needed to be collaborative, and two, what Linda mentioned is, rather than a typical insurance company contract that we kind of do and then don't look at for 2 or 3 years, we really do need to monitor this on a regular basis to see there might be changes we need to make where with the insurance company we wouldn't have the opportunity to do that.
Right. That's kind of back to that big insurance company comment. Okay, last question then, because we'll talk about this, I think, for both Nathan and Linda, but maybe you could speak to what this did for the hospital, Linda's hospital, as it relates to bad debt and what that could do. And Linda, if you want to comment, and then Scott, you could chime in.
Sure. I'm looking very forward to what it's going to do for us.
Yes.
We don't know yet, but looking forward to it. With no out of pockets, the billing is going to go down. The bad debt's going to go down. It's just it's going to be a much smoother process on the backside than what we're currently doing. And that really, I think that's also going to be a win for the employees of the school district, because they're not going to be getting those balance bills. And the school district did step up and do that. So that it will make it easier on the employees. It will also make it easier on the hospital, and it will reduce our bad debt.
Yeah. Scott, any comments about bad debt that you might add to that?
Yeah, so just to piggyback on that comment, part of the exchange in doing the direct deal is the employer in this case is waiving or reducing patient cost share, which helps out the provider, and in return the provider is giving more of a discount or better rates. In the end, it's probably not quite a wash, but that's the intent, is that while the district is decreasing costs, the hospital is doing a little bit better. So what we did in this case, they created a tiered benefit plan that was completely waiving 100% of the copay or co-insurance in order to use Valverde in their clinics.
And that goes back to your point. You really can't do that with the big insurance companies. I mean, let's just, we all know who they are, right? Kind of the big five. They're just not, that's not the game they're wanting to allow happen. And so that's why the school district had to go with a more independent TPA, a more independent approach to networks. All that had to kind of change on their part. And so what I would say to the audience is, it may sound like, well, our school district would never do that. But if you could share this story, just the Del Rio story, with your school district, your superintendent, whoever, they might start thinking differently. Because what do they want? They want to reduce their costs. And they don't want to have employees coming to them saying, I can't afford our insurance, or the out-of-pockets are just too steep, which we know it just is a death spiral in terms of what that does to our health plans. I think this is a story to not only be shared with you all, but this should be a story that's shared with local employers. School districts are a great example of that, and so on. So I want to jump back over to you, Nathan, because this is where I like to say, maybe some unexpected positive outcomes, maybe a few surprises on the way. maybe you could even just start with sort of how long this took. We all want to move fast, but maybe talk a little bit about how that played out.
Yeah, it actually took longer than we wanted it to, but the thing is, this is the first time we had ever done anything like this. And I think for the tertiary system, they wanted to make sure that it was the right thing for them. Basically what we wanted to have happen was we didn't want to have to call, I didn't want to have to call the CEO there like every time we had a huge claim. So I guess when Brant and his team got involved, like he worked directly with them on what kind of pricing discount was going to work for them and us. So that obviously took some back and forth, and it was, I think it was a very, it was more like a conversation than a negotiation, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of feedback going back and forth. But it took probably 3 to 6 months for us to really nail this thing down. But I think now it's running like clockwork.
Yeah. And it's no, secret that every hospital's got to watch their health plan costs. And you guys had already engaged in some of those, what I'll call reference-based pricing type arrangements where all this negotiation was the way that it worked. And so, Nathan, did you feel like by having a direct contract, not only that it, enhanced the relationship, but that it also eliminated this, like you said, this one-off kind of negotiation that was always going to happen? I mean, can you maybe how do you think that was impacting things? And could you have kept going that direction?
No, it wouldn't have worked out well. I mean, you can't do things like that long-term and focusing on what your core business is, which is obviously running a hospital, taking care of patients. So that's why it worked out so well. And, you always got to be cognizant of those costs. And obviously, like, we were looking at them. And that's why we made this decision to kind of go all in. And they were receptive, and you helped, and it worked.
Yeah. You were talking about how significant it's been, high 6 figures. One of the things that is also talked about oftentimes in these arrangements, and Scott, you maybe could speak to this, but do we do this as a derivative of Medicare? How do we set the pricing? Do we do it as a percentage of charges, et cetera? And so however you end up working it out with that tertiary facility, in y'all's case, I just made a note here when we were talking about this last week. I mean, it was easily over a 50% reduction in terms of percentage of charges. And so when you start applying that to just the claims that were going there, that's one thing. But now what you've done is you've funneled more care going there. So when you apply that 50%, call it discount, to a larger number, that's more savings, right? So that's kind of, I think and especially for your hospital, because what y'all are doing is your head count is growing, and it's growing pretty rapidly. And so that's something I think, again, we're not all in that exact same situation, but I think that's important. Scott, anything to add here in terms of maybe from the tertiary's point of view? I mean, you just talked about what it does for bad debt, and so Belinda, for her, I mean, it's got to do the same thing for the big tertiary hospital, right?
Patient bad debt. So the same thing in reverse from them. You're reducing the patient bad debt on their collections.
Yeah.
I was just going to make one other comment, maybe two. One is, I don't want to scare people away that it will take a long time. Just by note, that particular negotiation started in the spring of 2020. We all know what we were doing around March or
Good
April.
point. Yeah.
So I think as long as you have a willing partner on the tertiary care side, I don't think shouldn't be a drawn out process.
Yeah.
In other words, both parties want to get it done.
Yeah, that's true.
And then to touch on your comment about whether it's percent above Medicare or percentage charge or some other fixed rate methodology, at the end of the day, I wouldn't get so hung up on the methodology and how they're paid, but just that the net cost at the end and what savings that might produce. Because I think sometimes we get caught up in it has to be a particular methodology, and you maybe lose sight of what the end goal is, which is to get the deal done.
Yeah. Keep your eye on the prize. Okay.
Yes.
Got it. The big picture. Okay, cool. Moving along. Again, any questions? I'm going to kind of scan the audience. Please jump in, raise your hand, stand up. We'll try to grab those along the way. Yep, John, please.
Employees and family members. There's about 1,300 employees, and right now there's about 1,850 lives. And that was a big number. I didn't realize that was how many we had, but when we really started taking a look at that, and like Grant said, you start driving that number, and it's really going to help us compete with another provider in our community, especially since that other provider's prices are much higher than ours. And I think that was one of the main reasons that they came to us, because they saw the amount of spend that was going there. And so that was a big win, big surprise for us.
I'm going to repeat the question just so the audience, John's asking, how do you share the risk of specialty care? Is that right?
We have a carve out. There's a carve out that has certain percentages to it. And so that's how,
Well, define what you mean by risk.
right.
Oh, right.
We do not have direct contracts with any tertiary cares like Nathan does. So if their plan, if their employees have to go to a tertiary care, they're in their full plan. They're outside of our plan.
Meaning that Valverde is tier 1, and then they'll have a network or some other thing wrapped around it that would be tier 2. So if the services are not provided locally, they would have to go to a tertiary care and just follows their benefit plan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's no risk for Valverde in that
Right.
case to do the referral out.
Yeah, that's a good question. Then, and so for those of you that aren't familiar, if you're in a self-funded health plan, most likely you already have some sort of tiered structure now, where tier 1 is your own hospital. You want to keep your employees, getting care at home. And then tier 2 would either be a network, it could be one of the big national networks. It could be kind of one of these high performing networks. It's more regional. We see a lot of those, for example, around Dallas and San Antonio. And then tier 3 would be, either out of network or whatever. So the school district had to create that kind of plan, which they had never had before, right? It was just either Aetna or Blue Cross or whoever, that was it. And the employees go anywhere they want, which is why they were able to, through this process, uncover how much volume really was going to a for-profit entity that was effectively a competitor to Valverde here. So I can assure you that's going to change going forward. So we're going to have to watch that unfold. So if that answers your question, John.
And we'll be evaluating it on a quarterly basis. And again, we could not have done this without the expertise. We just didn't have the bandwidth. We didn't know what we didn't know. This is a pilot program for us. We're doing it for a year. Really want it to be successful so we can go forward and then encourage other employers to come to us and let's do the same thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I talked to a hospital this morning that's has set up something similar, and what they're hearing from other local employers, because everybody talks to each other, right, in these towns, is they're now coming to the hospital going, we want to do the deal that you did with XYZ employer. And so, I mean, that definitely puts you all in that position, especially.
And those conversations are already being had.
Yeah. So Linda, I know we're kind of camped out here on this particular slide, and this is one of our last slides before we start into our wrap up. But anything else that you would want to add in terms of, the relationship, keeping the channels open, anything that you want to add about the partnership or relationship?
The partnership with the school has been fantastic. The partnership with this group has been fantastic. And that's really what it takes. Is you have to be very open. You have to be open-minded too. And so that would really be probably my best suggestion, is find a partner who really does want to partner with you. Because if you get into a headbutting match, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
So for every problem there is a solution. Find the opportunity, find the solution.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect. And we'll kind of do a little lightning round here at the end and just kind of get some last minute comments and feedback. What I want to do now is just do a little bit of a recap on where we are and then talk about that third leg of the stool. So what we've obviously been talking about is how do we go and make an arrangement, create some sort of direct contract that's beneficial to the hospitals, your hospital's health plan. That's the tertiary. And what you're looking at on the screen are just sort of what Scott has developed, or here's some of the things that need to happen. So we have a much more, I guess, more robust playbook than what you're looking at on the screen right now. But if you're interested in that and want help, these are kind of the things that you need to be thinking about to do. And then, of course, regional employers. This is if you want to reach out to the school district, a regional employer. You know, the most common employers that we hear about are a lot of the, you know, if you're down in Houston, it might be ExxonMobil. And so a lot of people think, well, that's ExxonMobil. They're big. They, you know, hundreds of thousands of employees. They would never do a deal with us. Remember, their health plan is going to be a self-funded health plan, I assure you. And they have a whole team of people looking at where their employees are getting care in each of the regions where they set up a plant. So it could be a meat packing plant. It could be anything. Don't hesitate to think that those folks would not make some sort of special arrangement just for your geographic region. Because if they're not going to get care at your hospital, they're going to drive right past your hospital and get that care somewhere else. So we want you to be proactive there. And then the third leg of the stool, of course, is managed care. And while this is kind of what I call the blocking and tackling, this is something that was really surprising to me, particularly because this is not an area that I had much experience in. But last fall, we actually did a survey. Some of you might remember Torch did the survey, asking questions around direct contracting, asking questions around regional and tertiary. But we also asked about managed care. And the thing that we started to hear the most was back to what I said at the very beginning is CEOs and CFOs just don't have time. They don't have the perspective to know if it's a fair deal or a good deal. And if it is a fair deal or good deal, who's really making sure that whatever they agree to, that they're actually getting paid what they agreed to. And so this is what we call managed care contracting. A lot of us may use a third-party firm. You may do it in-house. But we know that as we got into this conversation, and now both Nathan and Linda's hospitals are utilizing some help from us in that area, it's been interesting to watch what's happened. But Scott, I'm going to start with you and just kind of ask, what are you seeing out there, boots on the ground? Maybe not particularly from these guys here, because I know that they're not prepared to speak about managed care contracting too much. But from your perspective, what are we seeing out there?
So there's probably three areas where the typical hospital has an opportunity or a potential need. The first is around just net revenue, which is either understanding the net revenue you're getting from each payer source or whether you're getting paid correctly. And so sometimes that comes back to hosting and being able to watch payment integrity and if you got paid correctly by a particular payer. And the other is just understanding, you know, where the money's coming from and how it relates to maybe you've set a benchmark as a particular percentage above Medicare. But so net revenue is kind of the first thing that I would suggest that a hospital kind of take a look at so that you know where the money's coming from and maybe what money you might be leaving on the table.
Yeah.
The second opportunity, which almost unanimously the hospitals mentioned if they had managed Medicare in their market, was understanding Medicare Advantage, the contracts that they have, even if they're reimbursing 100% of Medicare, understanding that those patients and costs don't end up on your cost report. I'm not the expert on that, but I know it's different for critical access hospitals versus the ones that are not critical access. So I would just say take a look at the Medicare Advantage plans that are coming into your market. How many of them are approaching you? Maybe looking at the portfolio and saying, are all of them good partners, or do we maybe need to pare some down? And so that's Medicare Advantage. And then I think the third thing is right now there's a number of, I don't really want to call them PPOs, but just entities developing networks that are kind of having a shotgun approach for network development. And so big and small, every hospital is getting hit. Texas is usually one of the first markets that these places want to hit. And so I'm seeing a lot of the hospitals getting bombarded with potential new contracts that really have no lives.
Yeah.
And so understanding, is it really worthwhile to even participate in this? What's coming down the pike? Or are they after you really just for a dot on the map?
Yeah. I want to just kind of poll the audience real quick because, again, I'm kind of getting my hands around this myself. But just by show of hands, Medicare Advantage, multiple contracts coming your way, maybe not knowing which ones you should start. Anyone having the same experience at all? Anyone willing to raise their hand? Yes. Okay. And then about what we call not the PPO networks, but these other.
I would just call them a network at this point.
Yeah. By show of hands, how many are starting to see networks, show up on your front door that you've never seen before, heard of before? Is that becoming more common? Yeah. So I guess, Scott, you're saying Texas is just such a big market. That's where they like to start.
We're usually one of the first 5 states when someone's trying to roll out a national network, they'll come to Texas.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Nathan, I know this isn't an area you spend a ton of time on, but just whether it's managed care or anything you want to just kind of add to the experiences you've been having at your facility.
Yeah, right now we're obviously looking at doing a comprehensive claims review for all the managed care plans that we're taking, because we do think that there's some money that's left on the table, and I think you've just got to constantly look at that, and glad we got a good partner to help us.
Yeah, money left on the table. We talked about that this morning. Linda, you're nodding your head. I guess you have the same experience.
The exact same experience. I want to know who your person is, because we need some help with that. But just in going through this process, we discovered that there was a significant amount of money that was owed to us because we didn't have the bandwidth to really get into the contracts, and we found that, and so. Just having that expertise to really get into claims data and make sure that we're getting paid correctly.
Yeah. Is bandwidth meaning like the time and the experience in doing, does everyone else have kind of that same problem? Is that just kind of by show of hands? I see a few heads nodding yes. I'd love a question or a comment from the audience if you've figured out a way to kind of tackle this, because the more contracts you have to review, the more Medicare Advantage that comes into the marketplace, and especially from a cost report, point of view, if you're actually going to end up losing money on these deals. Is there any ideas? Anyone have any great strategies out there they want to share? I'll repeat back if you're willing to shout it out. No one's brave enough to do it. Okay. How about any questions about what you're hearing, whether it be managed care or for the audience, the panel here, on what they've experienced? Anyone? Bueller? No? Okay. All right.
Raise your hand if you never want to talk about managed care.
Yeah. Oh, good. Well, there we got a few of those. All right. Well, we actually are going to wrap up early. I think that's, so we brought booze and we're wrapping up early. I think we're going to be the hit presentation of the conference. Am I right? I'm kind of feeling it. So now's the time to give our panel a round of applause, if y'all don't mind helping me do that. Yeah. We appreciate them taking the time. And for those of you that want to get in touch with us, here's how you can get in touch with me or Scott.